Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn.
Hi, my name is Bernard Hoffroy, and I'm a 24-year-old soccer coach here in San Francisco. I'm originally from Paradise, California, about 2 hours north of Sacramento up in Butte County. My soccer background is pretty brief. I played at the youth club and then high school level in Paradise, and then a little bit at the college level with Butte College, and that's when I started really coaching. Although I've coached a little high school soccer, the majority of my experience is at the youth club level. For the past year and a half or so, I've worked full-time for Two Rivers Soccer as a soccer program director for their summer camp up in the Sierras, and then as a staff coach for Two Rivers Bay Area, our San Francisco-based club team. Being that I don't have a professional playing or even a high-level college playing background, I always felt a tier beneath other coaches my age. One of the things I do to try and offset this is to interview as many coaches as possible. I try to talk to coaches of all different levels and age groups to try and get as much insight from different viewpoints as possible. While it started as a way to really solidify and feel confident in my career path, it has become a great way to really continue learning from coaches of all styles and backgrounds.
So before I get into the questions and answers from Bernard, this conversation between he and I actually happened a couple of days ago, and by the end of it, I said, oh no, we should have recorded this, because some of the questions were so good, they were so valuable, and just the kind of the off-the-cuff answers that I gave and the conversations that we had about the specific points that we'll cover here again, I decided that I needed him to send me a little kind of synopsis of our conversation, because he'd written it down, he had notes, and I just thought it was super attentive that he genuinely cared about what I was doing and what he could effectively take away or what he could discard as something that was relevant or not so relevant to his own pathway. And as he says there in his introduction, it's really a tool for him to access coaches and to, if anything, give him some confidence and to build this relationship with people that often coaches find themselves on an island, that they are themselves with their own teams. And I feel like we've done a lot of work with our social media in terms of connecting people and having people feel like it's an open source for being able to gather information. But I was super humbled by my conversation with Bernard. So that's why I've retroactively got his questions again, and I'll go through the answers as he asks them through this podcast. So love to hear your thoughts at the end of this. As always, you can find me at LeeDunneSoccer, and I'll tag in Bernard too in all of his social media as well.
Lee, go ahead and just run through a brief background of yourself, your soccer background.
So I grew up in England in a beautiful little town called Daventry. And I only call it beautiful really because I'm not there anymore. And I get to see it at a nice time of the year for a couple of days of the year. And then I get to move on again. So I can always look back at it fondly. I don't know if I would feel the same way about living there still. And I'm sorry to my family and friends who still do live there. But it was a place that soccer was part of the culture. There is a men's team there. We're surrounded by professional soccer, much like the rest of the UK. But for me, it was the location that I grew up in was surrounded. My friends and I all surrounded a central park. We would all meet at the park. There were games that we made up and games that I couldn't even explain to someone where the idea came from, but it was a means for us to play soccer, and soccer was the ball was the connector for all of us to play. And there were always a couple of key people who always had the best soccer ball because it was their birthday or because of Christmas, and they always had goalkeeper gloves so they could always play too. And the culture of our game, just we knew as soon as school finished by 3:30 or 4 p.m. everybody would be at the park and they'd be playing. Or during the summer, you knew that you could be out there pretty much at any time, and our group collectively would be there. Then we all played in the same youth teams. Shout out to Drayton Grange and then to Ford Sports. Fords were the kind of the black sheep of our town or of our culture because everybody played for Drayton Grange. And at one point, my best friend and I shifted over and played for Fords. And that was a big no-no, but we were still friends and we were still in an environment where everybody still wanted to play. Everybody was looking to hopefully become a pro. But then for me, the next step was to play in the Northampton Town Academy. And I played there for a couple of seasons. I had an amazing coach in my first year and a not so amazing coach in my second year. And that was really my first influence of the value of a good teacher. And the first coach, I felt like he put his arm around me a lot and looked after me and guided me more so than the second coach I had, who was a demander and a shouter. And he really expected so much and without really explaining the much of the how. Bear in mind, I'm still 11, 12, 13 years old at this point and still looking for guidance. And kind of a large part of my philosophy today is that I'm always looking to help players find the answer. And I think that had he helped me find the answer, maybe I'd be a pro. And I can't really say that. I say that with my tongue in cheek, but it's really, that was the most significant memory for me of playing in that academy. And yes, I still have my player pass and my center of excellence pin and all that good stuff, but that was a lasting memory that's really shaped kind of my forward progression into coaching and really driving to be that influencer on players. And there's nothing more rewarding than when a parent says he loves playing for you, or she thinks you're the best coach he's ever had, or we're really happy that we chose your team to play on. So that's always really positive feedback. A lot of that came from those early years. And at the time I didn't realize, I just realized that I didn't really like that guy. So I started to not want to go to practice, or I would fake an injury or be sick, or just at the end eventually decide that I'd rather go out with my friends than go to this guy's practice. And it all kind of led down the road of me being released from there. And I fell out of love with the game a little bit, played all the other sports that I could play at school, like cricket and rugby and basketball and tennis and pretty much anything I could get my hands on. But ultimately it always fell back to playing on the street and playing with my friends. And soccer was what we played. And so when I went on to, I played for my high school a little bit, then I played for my local college, which is effectively a junior college now, but then moving into university, and I played there too. And there was a guy who was the captain of the team I was on, and a very similar experience to that of the coach from Northampton Town. And I didn't really like him. I just wasn't enjoying my time there. And sure enough, it started coming out that, suddenly I had more work to do. And that was really my second influence of the value of a good person around you, a good teacher or a good coach. Or in this case, he was just the captain who was just what I thought was a loudmouth, and he was kind of the boss of the team because he'd been picked by the previous team to be the captain for the coming year. So I couldn't really do anything about it. And I just realized I didn't really like him, and I didn't really like the environment that he had created. And sure enough, soon enough, I moved away from that and dropped down a team for the following year, at which point I had a great time. So then the experience of this guy coming in that was just a good lad, and he cared that you were there, and he wanted to talk to you, and he just gave some advice or gave his own input or his own ideas, and that just felt so much more encompassing for me. So then as I set out along my pathway, I reflect on the people who had influenced me the most that were positive and negative. And I look at my PE teachers, that they were so significant to me, that they were always, of course, the ones that gave you the outlet from the classroom and get you on the field or get you out of the monotony of studying, but then also how they made everything easy in terms of this is field hockey. Field hockey isn't an easy game by all means, but the way they set up the practices and the way they set up the environment was such that everybody could play, and it was a way that you didn't have to stand in lines or dribble around cones. And that was still something that I was experiencing through soccer, where I'm playing at a semi-professional level and somebody is standing on the top of the box and the rest of the team is on the halfway line and playing a give and go and then taking a shot at the goal and getting ridiculed when the ball's going over the bar. So I consider those two environments, and then I know which one I have more fun in, and I enjoyed field hockey at that time more than I did playing at semi-professional soccer. So then these influences through my university helped me shape that my degree was in physical education, and I really wanted to become a teacher. And then I got the opportunity to come out to the US and coach for Challenger Sports. So coming out for Challenger was a real interesting experience for me because I was called a coach. I'd never been called a coach before. And I was working with these groups of children for a week at a time, traveling all over California, and just realizing, A, how good life is in California, that the sun is always out. And as an Englishman, I need the sun out. But that soccer, I was coaching kids who had never kicked a ball before. And it just blew my mind that the request was pass the ball over there and move here, do something else. And the technical breakdown of being able to actually pass the ball was such a surprise to me, because in England, everybody has a ball, or there is always a ball. And even the kids who didn't play soccer could still play soccer if they needed to. So that was a real eye-opener, and something that I decided I really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed the challenge of, I say a challenge, but also the task of sharing my love of soccer in an environment where soccer had no place to be, because kids were coming to soccer camp with their baseball shirts on, or even baseball cleats with a big toe bonker on the end of it. And I look back at that and I just think that really was almost the solidifying moment for me, that soccer was my life, and I thought that everybody else should have the same experience that I have had. And here I am now, moving through coaching licensing and getting into top of the game effectively with the A license, and that's still a foundation for me, that regardless of the players that I'm coaching, if I can put my arm around them and make them feel like they want to be there, even if they've had a bad day, it's easier to say, I can't go because I've got loads of work to do, or I want them to be on the side of, I want to be there and I want to play because this guy's attitude and this guy's personality and passion for the game is so infectious that it's a good environment that I want to be in.
What are your thoughts on the play, practice, play model?
I think it's a really valuable model if it's used correctly. And I think that when we're looking at working with younger players or inexperienced players and even inexperienced coaches, I think it's a super valuable tool, because let me start with the players. I believe the best way they're going to learn is by playing. And it's not just playing for the sake of playing, but you're setting up this small-sided game with the language that's leading you into your topic, so your practice portion of the session. So if you are setting it up correctly, A, the players are turning up and they're playing straight away, but then also they are experiencing a game that they may not have much experience at, so we're providing as much experiential learning as possible, and it's in an environment that is shaping them to have success from that game situation. So they're playing 2v2 or whatever the play is in the origins. Then you move to a 1v1, 2v2, 2v1 type situation where you're recognizing how to beat an individual with your partner or by yourself. So now you're helping them achieve in that 2v2. Then you go back to a 2v2 in the simplest level. You go back to this 2v2 game. Now they have experience of how to be successful within that game, because it's just been removed from it and now it's being put back into it. So I think there's a real good value for the player. In terms of the coaching, I think my theory on this is that a lot of the beginner coaches, recreational coaches, volunteer coaches, parent coaches are inexperienced and are unable to exercise their experiences of soccer because they don't really have any. So then the simplest way to control a group of players is to identify and isolate single skills or single actions. So thinking about my semi-professional experience, maybe the coach wasn't all that prepared, or perhaps this is what he's done forever. And this is also a common trend too, that we use single skill practices like that because it's easier to control and it's easier to manage. So I know if I lay a ball off to a player and he dribbles and shoots and he misses, I might be able to say what you've done wrong because you've leant backwards, or you kicked the floor before, or maybe you didn't have a good enough run up, you weren't moving fast enough, or whatever the issue is, you kicked it straight at the keeper. But then you change that into a 1v1 or a 2v2 or a 3v3 or a 3v2. Now it becomes more complex and there's much more going on. And I think for an inexperienced coach, that's a really difficult situation to manage because they don't really know what they're looking at, especially if they've never played the game before. Or maybe they have played the game, but it was years ago in college and they're not really sure what they're watching because they're watching their 8-year-olds play a 2v2 as opposed to watching Barcelona on TV on the weekend, which is aesthetically pleasing. And now you're watching 8-year-olds, it's not very pleasing at all. So then I think the model of play, practice, play really helps these individual coaches set an environment that they are also learning as well as the players. So the game idea is something that I've had many discussions about, because the idea of play is a reward often at the end of many practices. It's kind of, you dribbled around these cones well, or you behaved well, so we're going to scrimmage at the end. Or you guys were messing around the entire time, in brackets because they're bored, but you guys did mess around the entire time, so you don't deserve to scrimmage. And a scrimmage has always been a reward. In a lot of environments that I've been in, you always finish with a game. So I think to turn this upside down and have a play, practice, play approach where these individuals are now straight into a game is so valuable. And especially, as I said, with the younger, inexperienced players.
How do you put your own spin on your club's game model?
This is a good one, and one that I have recently just explored through the A license with a performance environment assessment, where I was asked to consider the model and the curriculum and the phases of development that my club has set out, and then how I then interpret that, or how I then deliver that. And so with the club I'm at right now, San Francisco Elite Academy, we have a very generic model, and the guys that put this together, forgive me if you feel like you've put more into it than I have that I've gathered from it. But the model is very generic, and I actually enjoy that because now I'm able to put my own spin on it. So we always have our own kind of, we have the ideas of the club. So much like a lot of teams, and this is where I think it's very generic and allows me to be flexible, that we want to have possession, we want to build out. There's different styles of play within the commands or within the thirds of the field, and I think that allows me to then say, yes, we are building, but actually this team's pressing us, because that's what most teams tend to do right now, because they know you're going to play out of the back. So we can break that line, and having these constants for our players as they move through the club is really valuable. Of course it's valuable. The players understand, and if you've listened to any of my other recent material, players having the answer is so valuable. So for me, as a coach within the club, the expectation is that when we are in a specific third of the field, this is the way we're looking to play. This is the way we're going to look to break down an opponent. This is the way we're going to look to recycle the ball or manipulate the game in some certain way. So I know that. I can deliver that to my players. My players then go and play up, or they go and play on another team in the same age group. They are then delivering and playing by the same game model. Now, the coach's interpretation, of course, is different, and this is where I think it's really valuable for me and for the coaching staff, because we have a conversation that says, in this area of the field, I would like this player to play this certain way. I would like the 11, when he gets the ball, to receive it in this area. I'd really like him to act a certain way. And then the other coach says, well, I actually like it when the 11 does something differently, but I know what the 11 is doing. So for me, my own personal game model, I want a ball in behind into the channels from the defensive third into the middle third, or the middle third into the attacking third, that allows our players to run forwards to the ball. I don't necessarily like the ball going into feet unless the ball is on the same side of the field already. So I then show that to my players, and then the club's game model is to break lines, and is to break lines with speed. So I then tailor that to my own model. Now, I have material on my website where I am encouraging people to download it, and it's just a free template, so you can build your own game model. And I think if you are able to do that and then take that to your club, if your club doesn't have a model, perhaps you can have an influence on that future model. But you can then also, if they do have a model, you compare your model with theirs, and then you look how there are similarities and there may be differences. But then what you do, and what I believe you should do, and what I have done before, is say, this doesn't work for me. I'm not happy. I don't want to play this certain way. I don't like being pigeonholed into certain expectations. Or maybe my players don't do it and you're not listening, so this is a moot point for us. Then you may consider changing your environment. Now, changing your environment may mean changing club, it may mean changing teams, it may mean changing age level. But I think it's a really valuable point to understand who you are first and foremost, and then be able to take that into your environment. So if you're a head coach of a college, then it's great for you because you get to bring in your own style and you're recruiting players that suit that. But within the youth game, and especially in club environments, you may have a club coach or a director of coaching that has said, this is the way we're going to play, or this is how we're going to play, maybe because it sounds good for parents, but this is the way we're going to play, and you need to coach that way. Now, my next ask of that would be, if you're telling me how to play that way, are you helping me to play that way? Are you providing me material? Are you providing me guidance? Or are you just expecting it? And then on the next breath will be, are you assessing me? Are you giving me guidance? Are you helping me to achieve it with my team whilst we're on the field? Are you watching my games? Are you watching game analysis and saying, actually, you look like you're achieving here, or could you try this a little differently? What are you trying to do in these certain areas? And so all back to your environment, I encourage you to have your own. I encourage you to have that conversation with your club or with your director of coaching and know what they are asking of you, if anything, and then you decide if that's a good fit for you, if you're happy with that, if you need to change the environment.
What are your views on game realistic training versus technical training at the younger age groups?
So everything I do, whatever the age group I work with, it always looks like a game. The idea is that it's always that game environment. And with the younger ages, in relation to developing this technical ability, I'll always use play, practice, play to kind of go back to our previous question. So I want my players to gain experience of playing the game because I think that is the best teacher, but the best teacher in a way that I am also able to influence. So that's why I use the play, practice, play model, especially with younger ages. So they play a 2v2, which I would use as kind of an introduction and a way for them to begin to understand the tactical nuances of the game. You have one opponent in front of you. Typically, it's even though it's 2v2, with the younger players, it's often played as a 2v1 because two players are drawn to the ball. So then understanding how you use that second player. And that's the how. So then I go with the practice element, and we may play a 2v1 or a 2v2 with certain restrictions, and that will then allow me to help them develop the technical ability to work through the how. So they've understood it and they've used that experience. Now they understand, or are beginning to understand, how important it is to be able to pass the ball successfully, or how important it is for them to be able to control the ball successfully so they can beat that player, so they can then score a goal. So then that's why I would use play, practice, play a lot with those younger ages. Now I look at the idea of technical development overall for all players, and of course it's a foundation of the game, but there has to become a expectation, I believe, for your players to have this technical proficiency, for them to be able to have a understanding of the needs of their game. So the way they can control the ball with both feet, for example, or strike the ball over a certain distance with both feet. And I think it's so important that this expectation is then moved on to the players as they get older, so that they have a ball and it becomes a part of their culture. And if you listen to a recent podcast I was in on the touchline, we talk in that about how soccer needs to become a constant for the overall development, for our overall improvement. It needs to become a constant. And for a kid to have a ball in their backyard and just to go outside when they find themselves in a moment of boredom and entertain themselves with skills and with touches and playing off a wall, I think that is what's really going to help us create this next generation of players. So I use that play, practice, play with the younger boys, and then allow the practices to develop over time into more tactical game approaches, with an expectation that players are able to control the ball to deliver on the tactical nuances of our practice.
Given the current social climate, what's your view on the use of forfeits in practice?
This is a difficult one, and I think it's a difficult one because I don't like to look at it as like a forfeit or an element of punishment for the players, but I think it's really important that the players have this attitude to play, that they're fighting and they're competing. And unfortunately, I think sometimes that is only found through kind of extrinsic motivations. So things like forfeits. If you lose this game, you get a lap, or you get 10 push-ups, or silly things like that, which I think they do have a place, but if the environment that you're working in doesn't create this drive and this desire and this passion for the players to have success, then I don't think that you can begin to challenge players in physical punishments without challenging yourself on why the players aren't trying so hard. And I kind of have ran many elements of coaching education and have kind of said, if a player is bored, it's your fault, or if players are messing around, it's your fault. And to go back to the idea of using a scrimmage at the end of practice as a reward, if it's your fault, then why would you take away the scrimmage? Because the players have just been in the environment that you've created. If that environment is conducive to falling around because there's no real structure, or it's too structured and it's too strict and it's one player playing at a time, then I don't think we should be punishing players. But I have used elements of forfeits in training sessions with things like rondos. If it's a 3v1 or a 2v1 and the players complete 5 passes or 6 passes, then we'll give them 2 push-ups, and then they jump back up and we carry on playing around them. So little things like that I think do have value, because it just adds to an intensity of what is, I'm trying to incorporate this idea of technical skill development within an element of a game where we're possessing and we're checking around and we're playing a square of 2 or 3 versus 1, so that there is always an open side and there's always a necessity to be moving. So there is a reward for you gaining that many passes. And I think that's really important for the players. So I do have elements of a couple of push-ups or a big jumping star or something just silly like that lets you know that, yeah, you lost out here, or you could have perhaps worked harder. But then also to go back to the interview I had with Colton Bryant, where if a player can say, I've tried my hardest there, is it fair for me to give them a forfeit, quote unquote forfeit, for them not being able to get the ball because perhaps they are the most underdeveloped and youngest player in our team playing against the best 3 players that are the oldest and fastest and strongest? So it's a philosophical issue, I think, and there are times where I'll use it. But in terms of playing a small-sided game of 4v4 and a team that loses, they are never the ones doing physical forfeits. If anything, they might be the ones that pick up the cones or collect the balls at the end of the practice. But for the most part, I like to think that the sessions I'm creating and the work I put into my periodization plan, everything is done for a reason. And when those players understand those reasons, they're then more likely to work within the reasons of our play. So if our periodization requires a 9 out of 10 for them through certain reps of a game, then they understand that. They know that's expected of them. And like I always say to my wife, if I have the answers, I'm so much more prepared. If I know the answer to this question, I'm going to give you the right answer. And with my players, it's very much the same thing. Hey, I need a 9 out of 10 for the next 25 minutes of work here, and they begin to switch on. Now, I can also facilitate the environment by having spare players to be able to feed the ball in consistently, because when the ball goes out of play, we have to wait for it to come back, or we have to wait for someone to go get it, and then we've got to set up again. Now we've lost 30 seconds of what should have been intense work. So I can create an environment that challenges these players to reach the level that I'm expecting of them. And I find I've had the most success when I ask them. So physical forfeits I'll often use in funny moments of rondos or little elements of a practice that maybe is not so serious or not so driven into the periodization. But once I'm kind of into the main part of every practice, there's no way my players are doing forfeits like that, because they understand what's expected of them and they're working hard.
What do you view as the role or importance of the team captain on teams of younger age groups?
This is an interesting one, because I grew up in a British soccer culture where being the captain was important, where you were the captain. There was a lot of expectation on you about how you are leading the team. You're riling everyone up. Of course, you do the magical coin toss at the start of the game, but the leader or the captain was someone significant. And I have just read an article after an interview with Jose Mourinho about how he hasn't always picked as the captain, he hasn't always picked the best leader. And I think that's a really interesting approach. So when I go back to the younger ages that I work with, for the most part, it's a necessity that we have a captain so they can do this coin toss and waste 5 minutes before kickoff and decide who's going to be the captain and who's going to decide which way we go when we're playing on a flat field and no one really knows what's going on anyway. So I think the league I work in, I'm advocating just to remove the coin toss, get rid of that. There's so much chaos already, and then just simply go straight on with home team kickoff, for example. The fields and the environments where the younger teams are playing are not affected by the cop behind the goal with 10,000 fans that it's tradition for your club to shoot towards. Or there's not a downhill or a certain element of wind affecting the game or sun in the goalkeeper's eyes. It's just not that level. So with the younger recreational levels, a captain is just someone that you just pick and say, okay, it's your turn this week, an element of keeping things fair. Or if somebody's always on time or someone's trying all their best or they're the best teammate. And that's a lot of just kind of moments that I capture when I'm coaching and I notice a player engaging with another player in a really positive way. So I use that as a reward. With my older players, I will use the most consistent, the most reliable player on the field. And again, to go back to that Mourinho quote, it's not necessarily the guy who's jumping around and shouting and is leading that way, but it's a captain that leads by example. So one of my 2007 boys is an outstanding player. He's quiet, but he's consistent. He's always there. He's always at training. He's always reliable in the game, and he just gets on with the way he plays. And we did an MVP vote this season. He got not one single vote. And if I was doing the Coach's Player of the Year, he would be my pick because he's so consistent. But he doesn't score goals and he doesn't do all of the fancy skills. He breaks up play and he moves the ball on. He understands his role as a centre back. He understands his role in helping us play out or helping us control the game and make it predictable. And he does it so well. And it's almost like it's so well, it's so reliable. Everybody forgets how much of a good player he is. And then the players who score the goals are the ones who get the votes. But they only get the ball because of him. So in terms of looking at who my captain is, somebody like that is always going to be my win out for a captain. And I understand in older environments, you'll use a captain as perhaps a go-between between the players and yourself, and especially in environments like college and high school where it's a big deal. But to be honest, with the youth game that I work in, I don't have a captain's armband. I just, for the most part, it's throwing a kid forward to go and figure out the coin toss for us because referees don't talk to the players on the field. They talk to the coaches if there's any issues. And until I think the youth game gets older and then captains become more influential, for the most part for me, it's going to be that player who is just a solid, reliable player. And if anything, the coach or the referee calls for captains and I send the same player, or the same player understands that it's now his turn to go as the captain, and the players always look at that, and of course they want to be captain because they think there's a stigma and an element of quality attached to it. But when they ask about it, and I ask them to reflect on who that player is for our team, and just to give them a moment to understand what I look for in that captain is somebody that is that reliable player and that consistent player. So they can begin to understand that is what is required for a good leader, for a good captain, is to lead by example.
What are your views on giving soccer homework?
Technical development, I think, is super valuable and can be used through homework. And I know I had a conversation with a coach the other day who said that the parents for the players on his team were complaining that he was perhaps setting too much homework or his expectations were too high on those players. And I don't want to judge or to give my opinion on it without really knowing the whole environment. But I think that homework is a really good way to create that constant, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a constant for these players. I just don't like the idea of it being a requirement or a forced element. So it's, if someone has to do homework, you have to tidy your room. When you have to do these things, they become a chore and they become something that you don't really enjoy doing. So then I try and encourage competitions between the team. So we'll have a juggling competition, or I'll challenge them to send me videos on Instagram of them doing a certain skill. And that encourages them to do it. Maybe some of them don't want to share their videos, but I check in with them anyway and I make sure that they are doing it, but they don't want to check in on a video because they feel like they're going to be judged or people might laugh at them. And I understand that they're developing boys who are trying to find their way in the world. So I understand if they don't want the spotlight on them, but I want to know that they're trying. And of course I have players that have this outgoing attitude where they're carefree and they'll post whatever they can or they'll show whatever they can. Coach, look at this, look at this, look at this. And I think that if, again, back to this environment and this culture of soccer, if I can create a passion for them to want to be better, to want to be able to do a skill, and I'll show them my own skills or I'll show them skill videos and talk about things that I'm trying to achieve because I still have a ball at my feet most days. And then create this environment with them that is about us collectively all trying to improve. So can you do a double around the world? Well, one kid can do it or maybe just about do it, and one kid can't even balance the ball on his foot. So he sees us all practicing it. He's going to be practicing it, and there's a chance that he's going to go away and try and do the same thing because he wants to get that little bit better. I know that there are a lot of organizations out there or companies or apps even with the touches on the ball or the challenges and the skill videos that you can copy. And I think that whilst I have my own reservations about that type of I guess training or type of engagement on the ball, I think there's most definitely a place for it. It's just a case of making it realistic. So we talk about playing off of a wall. Now, if I play off the wall and turn and fire into a goal or fire into another wall because that's like another pass, I think now we're becoming a little bit more realistic because the player is moving the ball as if they would in a game. They receive from one side, turn and play to another side. And I think if that's a part of your game model or a part of the way a player is playing, then it definitely has value because they're working on controlling the ball and so on. I read a tweet the other day that said toe taps should be banned for 2020. And I think that's really funny because it's one of these kind of repetitive skills that soccer camps or organizations or apps may have players doing for ball familiarity, and they'll have their pitch on it. But I think it has to be relative for the player. So if they live near someone, can they play 1v1? So they have a sister that they can play 1v1 with. Do they have a sister or a brother that they can, or a cousin or a neighbor that they can start doing skill school with and playing against each other and showing off? Now we're developing a culture, and I just don't think that little kind of 50 reps of toe taps and of soccer boxes are really, really helping us to develop in valuable soccer homework.
When is it appropriate to give kids concrete positions versus having them play all positions?
Well, here's another philosophical debate about players that could probably play in multiple positions, even as professionals. You look at guys like James Milner for Liverpool, and even when he was at City too, the various positions that he can play and can play them consistently. So that might be an argument to say players should be able to play anywhere. But especially the age I'm coaching at 12, 13, 14 years old, I feel like they're becoming more reliable in certain positions. So I try not to pigeonhole them into them, so I don't want to necessarily only have one player that can play in one position. I can only play as a winger, and I have a couple of those right now, that's their preference to only play in those positions. And I would say that on any given weekend, the majority of my team will be playing in very similar positions. And that's because they're comfortable, because we're in an environment now where we're starting to compete and we want to win games. So constantly rotating players around in positions is not going to help me. But I always have an idea or a standard, I guess, with my players that you should be able to play a relative position that's next to you. So if you are a number 10, you could go and play as a number 9. If we're playing a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, then we shift to a 4-4-2. You can go and play as that second number 9 and almost play like a false 9, but it's you understand what that is what is being asked of you. If you are a number 8 or even number 10, should be able to play the number 6 and should be able to drop into centre back if they're needed, because they still see the game in front of them. They still have the ball coming into them. They're still under pressure. Now, there are some differences in terms of the way we defend in the middle third to the defensive third, so that's going to affect a position. But they understand the game model, and it's not about me turning up at the weekend and saying, oh, you know, normally I'm number 8. Today I'm going to put you at number 4. Go on. I'm never going to do that. So I'm going to set them up for failure if I do that. So if I really want them to play in that position, or I think that there's a chance that they could play a different game there, or there may be a different environment for us to challenge that player in that space, then during practice, during the week, I will have identified that. Maybe our opponent is strong or our opponent is weaker, so we can have a little more flexibility. So I'll say to a player that I'm going to put you here and we're going to try it out this weekend. So I'm going to set you up for some success during the week. So when we get to the weekend, you at least know what you're doing. It may work, it may not work. And after 5 minutes, I may have to move you. But there's no shame in that, because I want to see how you do in certain elements of the field, in certain elements of the game. You want to go to college, you want to go on to be a pro. You may end up playing in a different position. And there's plenty of professional players out there who said they started off in X position and then finished their career playing Y position. So I think that positions are important because the players need, I guess, what you would say, an identity on the field. It's never a surprise as to the positions they're going to play. And so now they can begin to build, if we talk about this culture and this homework, they build reference of players that are playing in similar positions as them. So if you are a number 7, of course, you're going to look at Ronaldo. Now you can begin to look at the traits that he has. If you're a center midfielder and you really like Ronaldo, that's great, but his game doesn't really relate to yours. So understanding your constants and then understanding the player around you, I think, is super valuable for the players. So we do them a service, as I always say, give them the answers. If we give them the answers and give them positional profiles, you are a center midfielder. Here is what I want from you as a central midfielder. Here is your role within our game model. Now, where everyone's got a chance of succeeding.
How do you deal with kids blaming another team for cheating or blaming a loss on a ref's fault with a negative mindset after a tough game?
I laugh because just this weekend, to go to dealing with my own, I'll lead this by outlining what happened this weekend, in that the referee called a real loose game. It was kind of physical. There was, at the end of the game, we won 3-2, and it was a state cup game. It was like a preliminary seeding game. So you win, you lose, you're still moving on. You're still just figuring out your level of play. And so it got heated. The parents for the other team were continuously yelling at the referee, but because their coach was yelling at the referee. And before the game, I spoke to the coach and said, welcome. You know, we did a walkout. We just try to make it as professional as an environment for these teams to come in and play and understand that it's a game playing environment, and it's not necessarily all about the result of the game, or it's not about the parents as individuals who feel aggrieved by this coach or by this referee, So I spoke to the coach before, and he said that he's looking forward to the game. It should be a good game. They've had a good season. And so it's great. This should be fun then. And it was a close game, and the referee, as I said, didn't really call anything super strict. And the parents start yelling about the referee. Come on, ref, make the call, ref. Come on, ref. Hey, he's pushing us. And then the parents on my team would start getting louder and start cheering more if we score a goal or if we win the ball. Then in reaction, their parents are now shouting more and more and feeling more egregious. Then we've got the opposition coach who is now getting angry, and I asked him, "What can you please control the parents to at least have a word with them to calm down, that this isn't happening to them, and elements of the game, if it was fully illegal as claimed by some of these parents, it seemed to be, then the referee has a position to make calls on that." Now, his preference for the game was to let it go. So he keeps playing. He's in close contact with the game, telling the players, play on, play on, play on, play on. And there were a couple that could have been called and a different referee might have called it. But then now these parents feel that it was done to them. In the final few minutes of the game, 2 players jump for a ball. One gets hit. The opponent player gets hit, and he gets a little split lip and he has some blood on his lip. So then their parents are yelling and shouting about the player being punched, which did not happen. The player that it happened to actually had blood on his sleeve because his shoulder, upper arm hit the player in the mouth. And he said sorry, and the player said okay. Then, so the parents feel like this is all kind of bubbled up to their player being hurt. So now their coach is yelling, the parents are yelling, and then at the end of the game, as the referees are walking away, they all stand and sarcastically say, "Great game, ref," and cheering and thanks. "How much did they pay you for this one?" And so I now feel it's my position, and I guess you can go, you know where the story's going, but it's my position to address that. You parents, please don't talk to referees like that. A, it's hard enough to get referees. B, they have called the game to the best of their ability. Now, your team and your coach have let this get away. And so my players, then this player with the split lip, his parents are saying that he was punched. He said he wasn't punched, but they said he was punched. So now they're saying, which one was it? Which one was it? We're going to take pictures. We're going to take pictures. We're going to press charges. And so this escalates, and the coach is continuing. Now the coach is a part of this mob of parents that is yelling and demanding justice. And now I find myself going back to this question and saying, so this all escalates. Eventually there was a parent, a really calm parent, who managed to get everybody away. All of the parents from my team escorted our players away, who were telling their parents to be quiet and to give it up and to accept that they lost. So my players are making it worse also. So I calm them down. I kick them out. They all go in their cars. They're gone. And then their coach is continuously, he's like, we're going to report this. This is disgraceful. This is not how we play soccer. And so to go back to this question of saying, how do you deal with that? You as an individual, you may feel like somebody has done something to you, but they really haven't. That referee did not call the game in a way on purpose to upset the other team. He didn't do it to upset the other coach. He called the game in the best way that he thought possible. He actually gave a lot against us. So you couldn't even say that he was biased in one way or another, or maybe he was the home referee, so he was more biased towards the away team. You kind of hear all these theories and this kind of subconscious decision making. So then when I look at this question again, I say, if I behave in an appropriate way, then the parents are going to copy me. If I yell, come on, ref, what are you doing, ref? That allows my parents and my players to act the same way. They're going to do the same thing that I do. So I show respect, they're going to show respect. Then in my preseason meeting with my players and with the families, I set expectations and I set measurables for us. And the measurables are what we can influence and what we can control. So if you take my online course, we work through the environment that you are working in, and again ask some of the same questions of what you can influence and what you can change or what you cannot change. So always the first thing on the list of what we cannot change and what we cannot influence are the referees and our opponents, or the opponents' coaches and opponents' parents. So we instantly write those off. We can't do anything about them. Now, I'm disappointed in my players speaking to parents like that, because that's not their place to do so, and that was addressed after the fact. But all season we've had no issue, and this was kind of the culmination of 70 minutes of complaining from opponents. So we won the game, players were happy, but if I just have this standard that I set and that I follow, and I communicate that with the parents and with the players and let them know that their place is to support and the players' place is to play, the opponents, the referees, none of that is in our control. That's for me to talk to, or the captain as we get older, hopefully. Now I am not feeling so aggrieved or so offended or so personally outdone by this referee who has turned up to make $30 or $40 for an afternoon of soccer.
What are your views on connecting with players off the field?
This is another good one, and I think it requires boundaries, and it requires clear communication with parents and setting expectations. That with my oldest players, I have a group text message with them all on it, and I'll use it for sharing funny moments from games or something that's happened, or there's a game coming up on TV, just little things where you find yourself, oh, I should tell my players that. And instead of waiting for practice, I have this text message with them. Now, I didn't start that straight away, and this was the end of 3 seasons with them, and I implemented this group message at the end of season 2. So I'd had them for almost a year. So I build a relationship, I build a rapport with them, I build expectations. With my younger players, I've had them for a season, and I don't have that set with them. Partly because not all of them have cell phones yet, and I imagine that after this Christmas they probably all will do. But I wanted to, again, build that relationship, build that safe space with them, so that once we do have this, I don't have to set this up and then have to remove it, or have to have a serious conversation about the manner or the etiquette or the way players are sharing things within the message. So it's also a really good way for a player to text me and say, what color kit do we need again this weekend, or what time, coach, I'm going to be 5 minutes late, or whatever the deal is, they can let me know. And I use email communication with the parents. We use TeamSnap, so I send alerts or messages out through that, and that's great. But it's just so, I think it's so interpersonal. So they just get this message from me, and they don't have direct access to me. And I actually really like being able to connect with my players like that. So connection off field, my players follow my Instagram, I'll follow their Instagram, I'll comment on the stuff that they post, because a lot of the time they're posting soccer stuff, and so I'm encouraging them on asking questions. I'm challenging them to do more, or to do better, or to call someone else out on the same video, so that we can get more of this culture of soccer going between them all. So I think it's really valuable. It's also helpful that I coach boys. I think if I were coaching girls, I would be behaving a little differently. And I think that's just even differently to add a team manager to the text message thread, just for safety and just to be clear. If you've all done safe sport and setting yourself up, now you know that you don't want to put yourself in an environment or a situation where anything is questionable. I don't want anyone to ever question my character. So I work with my players, I work with the parents, I set a standard and an expectation, and I have my morals with my players, and I have this culture and this environment with them that is a safe space, and I want them to share things with me, and part of that is reaching to them on their level. So I took a seminar at the convention last year, and the title of it was Coaching the Screen Age Athlete. And these screen agers, as we call them now, they have a phone in their hand. They don't read emails. So I got to connect with them on their level to be able to get the most out of them, I believe. So if I can have a conversation on the phone, or a FaceTime with them, or even just a quick text message of challenging them or asking them what's going on, how are they, now I'm connecting to them on their level. And I think part of my role as the coach is to influence them and to help them as people as well as individual soccer players. So I can connect with them in multiple ways and engage with them, because otherwise I'm going to send them an email, they're not going to respond. I'm emailing their parents are busy, they may do it, they may not do it, they may forget. So I'm really paying attention to who they are and what they need.
What do you believe the role of an assistant coach to be?
I led a coach training once, and there were coaches and assistant coaches that were in the room, and I asked the head coaches, how do you use your assistant? One guy said, oh yeah, he just picks up the cones. Well, that's really good, I guess. If that guy's happy doing that and you need cones picking up regularly in your session, then I guess you found your niche. But I still laugh about that, because I've never really used an assistant coach. And through the B and the A license experience, you are partnered up with another coach and you take it in turn. So one of you is the head coach, the other is the assistant, and then you flip-flop. So it's really valuable within the methodology, because you're working with both the attack and the defense to set the environment so that you can then move into coaching whatever your topic or focus is. So your assistant is actually used as your opponent coach or your opposing coach to get the team or the practice itself running in the right way. So all the players are in the right positions and they're controlling the game. So when I think about the value of an assistant coach like that, why on earth would everybody not have an assistant coach? If you're playing a 2v2 and you really want to work on your two strikers combining to beat two defenders, then you need your assistant coach to coach the two defenders to be better defenders. Now it's a perfect match. You're both working on opposite sides of the ball and your players are getting maximum benefit. Now, if you have an assistant coach that picks up cones, then you might as well do them a favor and tell them to stay at home. And I think that maybe that coach didn't know anything, the assistant coach, maybe the assistant coach was just a parent, or perhaps they have great experience and it's just never been asked of them, or maybe they didn't feel it was their place to reach out and try. But I would love to have an assistant coach, and it's something we talk about in our club environment, where typically a coach gets a team and that's really about it. You get a parent that will volunteer to manage the team, but no real assistants. And most coaches are too busy. You know, there's a theory that I could be the assistant for the A team, and then the A team coach could be the assistant coach for me, but we both practice at the same time on the same field. So there's no real value in us both being quote unquote assistant coaches unless we need cover. So in a club environment, we're talking about hiring several coaches that would simply be assistant coaches. So they'd be available for most sessions, and they may be younger coaches or developing coaches that will get a mentor out of it or a role model such as myself, but then they'll also get this experience of working with teams, working with players in different environments. Now their education is growing, their experiential learning is improving. And I think if we are looking at future generations of coaches, then this is kind of a no-brainer way to go. But if you can have an assistant coach, I think if you can use them properly like that, where you set an expectation for their role within the practice. So this is the practice we're doing. This is what I want you to do in it. Whether you have them as a simple level of feeding the ball in because you're playing 8v8 and you have 16 players, so you don't have a spare to continuously feed the ball, or you need someone to be coaching the defenders while you're coaching the attackers. I think it's a complete no-brainer to have somebody out there who is working towards the same goal as you.
Do you think high-level playing experience is necessary to be a good coach?
I don't think that it is necessary, because I work with plenty of good coaches who had an element of playing. So I think the request, or maybe if you're really judging someone on their coaching ability, or if you are judging on if you should hire somebody, I don't think it should be a high-level playing experience. I think it's nice, sure, but if you find these coaches online on their club web pages with their bios that identify they were a professional before they even list their coaching license level, I think that's a problem. Now, if you are able to say, did you at least play? I think there's a lot of value in that, but then there are also some coaches out there that didn't really play or came from a real low level of experience that are changing the world. So I don't think high level is a necessity. And I think in the US youth game especially, it's a big thing to be able to say that the director of a club or the certain coach of certain teams has X amount of playing experience. But I recently learned about a guy who I coached with who I had no idea anything about his playing experience. I just knew he was a good coach. And it turns out that he played in a youth national team program, but you wouldn't know that from him. And I think that that's a huge testament to his character, that he is able to not care, or he's able to prove himself on the field by the quality of his coaching, and not by saying I've got national team experience, so I must know what I'm doing as a coach too. And I think the same goes, and this is something that really gets under my skin sometimes, to coaches with an accent. Of course, I have an accent, but you only know it if you listen to my podcast and if you talk to me. If you read my tweets, read my Facebook, read my LinkedIn, whatever, you would not know that I am an Englishman unless something really English stands out about me. But I do that on purpose, because much like my theory on really good level of play to be a really good level of coach, just because I have an accent doesn't mean that I'm a good coach. And I worked with a guy once who said, are you a good Brit or a bad Brit? And I thought that was really interesting, but it's so true. And especially here in the Bay Area, there are a lot of British coaches out here and a lot of European coaches too. But a lot the original days of coming out to coach soccer in the early 90s, late 90s, where you could kind of get away with saying that you played for Manchester United, as most guys did, or played wherever, and now they're coaching. That's begun to be found out. And there are a lot of good American coaches out here. There are a lot of good British coaches too. And everybody's working towards hopefully the same goal. But I think whatever somebody's background or experience is, it shouldn't take away from them as a coach. And so if I am hiring coaches, or I'm looking to bring a coach into the fold of an organization, or even an assistant coach now, I want to see them in action of doing what the requirement is. So I want to see them working with a group of 20 players or 10 players or a group of 8-year-olds. I want to see them do that, because you could have been a professional that won the World Cup, but can you coach 8-year-olds? Because the expectation is for you to coach 8-year-olds. So let's put that first. And now let's look at people's resumes that explain what they've done as an individual within the game. So I have built a club, I have led teams, I have done all of these steps to be a good coach. I've taken this license. And I think before anything, oh, and by the way, I played in the World Cup. That's a really nice touch on top of everything that you've a little bitter, but that's because I don't have that playing experience. So maybe if I did have that high level playing experience, maybe I would say, everybody needs that high level playing experience to be a good coach. But I think that if you can be a player of the game, regardless of how you play it, then let's take that as a win too, because you already have that culture of playing. So you understand the game. Think about many volunteer coaches that have no experience of the game, and now that's changing a little bit as the culture grows, as the next generation of players are growing up and becoming parents and beginning coaching. But there was a time there where a lot of people had no idea what was going on. And so I think at least if we're asking of someone to have that experience of playing, regardless of the level, then they have some experience of the game.
What has been the effect of your career on your family? And how have you been able to find balance? And what are some of your non-soccer hobbies?
One of the biggest lessons I've learned over the last year or two is that actually incorporating my wife has been some of the best fun I've had in my coaching career. And it was always a separation. So I would go and coach and then I would come home. So I'd finish the game, be home by lunchtime or whatever, and then we would have family time, whatever that would be. But now I've incorporated her in everything I do. So she comes to most games. She doesn't really come to practice because she has her own job to do. But with games, she is now a part of the team. We get to talk about it. I get to air my frustrations or celebrate with her. And what I've learned is that she's my biggest fan. So when she wants me to do well and she wants us to have success, but then she's also a voice of reason when things don't go the right way or certain things happen. And she's there to talk about it. And I think that's been the largest realization for me, that she wants to be there and support. So why not let her? Why not bring her along? And it just means that after games, I get to take her out for lunch, or we get to stay away for a weekend because the games are all out of town, or we go to tournaments together. Just little things like that that really help us kind of engage in soccer, but it's also still about us. And I think that's been the most success I've had. And I don't know how many guys that I've been involved with in the game that have been separated from their partner, and part of it is because I don't think there were the right boundaries in terms of when you're coaching, when you're not. And I spoke to a friend the other day who just said that soccer is everything he ever does, but he has a kid, and so I don't know how he fits that kid into his life, or maybe it was just kind of a passing phrase. But I really encourage you to understand what you are doing, where you're committing your time, and then how you can incorporate too. Now, if you have a child, I understand that's very different, and I don't. But with my wife, she comes along for the games, and then I take her out for lunch or for dinner afterwards, and I think that's been some of the most success. And so it goes into kind of one of my hobbies away from the field, and I would say that I don't really have all that many hobbies away. We'd love to travel, love to hike, I love to see. I've kind of this bucket list of visiting every national park in the US. But I also have a VW bus, an old 1978 VW. You can check it out actually on Instagram. It's at VWanderbus, VWANDERBUS. Shameless plug for my bus Instagram there. But it's something that I am beginning to work on. I watch a lot of YouTube and figure things out. I go on a lot of forums. Right now I've got the intake manifold taken off the right side of the engine because I learned how to do it. And for the hour or two that I spent doing that and reinstalling and getting it running again, I didn't think about soccer. And that has been a really kind of cool, eye-opening experience, to have something that is so completely removed from soccer that I'm completely out of my depth, and I feel confident in most soccer situations. And I put a spanner in my hand and I'm trying to unloosen a bolt on the bus, and I don't know if it's the right one, and I'm nervous I'm making a wrong decision, and I'm nervous I'm going to break it. Well, that has been a huge help for us, because now we have a fun weekend car that if we go away to a game, we can go and then camp in the bus too, because it's a camper. So we stay away for the weekend or for the night, or we just take it out around town. And that's been a huge, huge change in our life, that we have something separate other than just this constant travel for soccer or constantly being involved in soccer. So get yourself another hobby, play a musical instrument, find something else that just completely removes you from that environment of soccer. And you find that, and I find when I come back to it, whether it's 2 hours of working on the bus and coming back to session plans or periodization plans, that I just feel invigorated and I feel refreshed and I feel excited to do it again. I have a change of focus and a change of attention.
How did the podcast start?
The podcast started because I wanted to, I guess, share. I wanted to grow my own brand and credibility. I really wanted to use it as a platform to talk with more coaches. And I know you have these questions, and I feel like this is something maybe unheard of in a lot of coaching environments, that a coach will readily ask questions. And I think this is the true testament to you, Bernard, because a lot of the time people won't ask the questions, or they'll be comfortable in who they are, or just kind of believe that they have the answers and just figure their way through things. And so I guess I didn't have, or I didn't even think maybe, but perhaps probably didn't have the confidence to approach someone to ask those questions. And it's not those people that I would have approached. I guess I just didn't really consider doing something like that. And so with the podcast, the idea has been to not only share my opinions and my thoughts and things like this, but then also to use it as that platform to challenge people or to just find out a little bit more. But ultimately, it's a voice, and I have worked through many coach education classrooms, and people say, like, thanks so much, this was so useful, this was so helpful. And I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on the youth game in terms of the cultures and the environments, and I definitely don't profess to be an amazing coach, but I'm trying to be. And if I can share the little things that I take away, that maybe someone can also take away and benefit from. So that's really where the podcast came from. And it's a throwback to Heads and Volleys, and the fact that was the game we played as kids, where you can only score off of a head or off a volley. And then if the goalkeeper gets 5 goals scored against them, then they hold onto the post. Everyone takes a shot at their butt with the ball. And that was hours played on our park when we were younger. And if I think about the true purpose of this podcast, is really about sharing this passion for the game. And a lot of that passion came from me as a kid playing at the park. And that's a really fond memory for me. So it just only made sense to call it that.
What are some of your favorite books on coaching?
I actually like to read books that are not coaching. And I think to kind of go back to the idea of a hobby or something different away from soccer, I love to read soccer. I love to read, for example, I read Jonathan Wilson, Inverting the Pyramid. It took me about 6 months to read it because it's so complex and it's so deep, and it's all about the history of formations. And with the history of formations comes the history of a culture. And it's so deep. And then I would find myself reading parts and then Googling it and then getting lost in Google for half an hour as I explore the Hungarian teams. And then before I know it, it's been 6 months and I've completed the book, and it's so good. It's so valuable. But when I think about how I'm dealing with everyday situations, I have my periodization plan, I have my game model, we have very much the content that I need to achieve this model. Now, if I'm looking for practices or for ideas, then Twitter is the answer, really, because you can either throw the question out or you can come across material that you can adapt and adjust to make your model work specifically. You can change player roles, etc. So if I'm considering why I read because I want to be better. I don't think I can get necessarily better through reading a coaching book, but I like to read about whether it is the journey that someone has taken. So if you read Cruyff, My Turn, it's incredible. That's not necessarily about coaching itself, but it's about his journey, about who he was, about what he's done, and kind of the decisions. The same thing about Das Reboot by Honigstein. Just the reading about what the German Football Federation did when they realized that they hit the lowest of the low and they can only go back up from here. And so their approach and their focus on setting this goal of winning the World Cup and what it took for them to get there and everything they did. And I think if I can learn anything about critical thinking or problem solving, then I'm reading these books for that same situation. Now, I'm not about to take my teams to win the World Cup, but if I really look at them and their improvement, and if I'm now looking and measuring us in comparison to performance in a league or performance in a tournament, now I can take those same lessons learned from those books and put them into real life. And the same thing about reading other books that are just, they're removed from the actual coaching world. So I read a lot of psychology books, and actually right now I'm reading a book about peak high velocity and the way players grow or individuals are growing and how that's affecting their sport and how we can help them maintain at peak performance instead of running them into the ground. And the really important thing for me from that is that when a player is growing, they should be sleeping and they should be resting as much as possible. And yet these are the kind of times where we're scheduling them and running them even harder. So there are players right now in my team that are at peak high velocity. So they're growing the fastest and the most right now. And then I think about the schedule that they've had for the last month, where it's been multiple games and multiple practices. And I'm aware of this, but I want to be better so that my coaching can be better, so that I say I need a 9 out of 10, but from you, you're only going to play 2 or 3 of the 5 or 6 reps. Why? Because you are growing. You need to rest. And I want to know enough so that I can teach them. And I feel like you're beginning to master a topic, or at least understand it, when you can teach somebody else. And right now, if I were to do a podcast on peak high velocity, I would say it's about the time that players are starting to grow, and I don't really know much else. And it's something that should be deeply considered for the age of player that I'm working with, because some of them are maturing and some of them are not. So until I can do a podcast on it, I want to learn more and more. So I go to the local library and I grab my book. And if anything, my biggest advice would be to get a library membership, because all of the books that you could ever want on coaching or psychology or physiology are going to be at your library. So you get to save yourself a bunch of money too. So you don't have to keep shopping on Amazon. So there we have it. There were some excellent questions from Bernard. He's not here, of course, because we had this chat before and I've just re-recorded for your enjoyment too. But there's an hour and 7 or 8 minutes there of just picking my brain and really me being able to give you my thoughts, give you my opinions on things. And that's pretty much what this is. This has been an opinionated podcast. So if you have some feedback, please let me know. Send me a voicemail. I'd love to hear from you, because I want to know if maybe you see it completely differently and I want to challenge myself to understand it from your perspective, or maybe you agree with me and that's just a little bit of a boost for me to continue to beat the same drum. But ultimately, I try and encompass, I mean, soccer is my life, but I try and bring everything into that fold. And in notably talking about my family, and if I separate the two, it becomes a bit of a battle between my wife and between the game. But if I can marry the two together, then it's not a choice that I'm making. It's something that we do together, and now we have ownership. And the parents really like her too, so they don't shout at me, or they're less inclined to shout at me because she's around and she's really nice. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks as always to Tactical Pad and to Now Soccer Innovations for their material. I go on about it every time, but you should definitely get on my website and just check them out. Recently, there was a situation in the game even just yesterday, and I pull out the board with the players and I highlight the areas where we're matched up and we're not having any success yet. We continue to try. So how do we figure this out? And I use the innovations board for that. I set it out. Here you go. Take a look. What do you think? What could we do here? What about this? What about that? And it's a 2-minute team talk that is made so much easier by this visual aid, so the players understand what they're doing. So thank you again always. There is more coming. It's holiday season. I'll have another one in a couple of weeks. But until then, Happy New Year and happy holidays.